In principle, human beings are born free and equal. In practice, the differences between individuals become visible very early in life. The setting in which children grow up has a decisive influence on their future opportunities. Some will have more chances of getting a good education and holding positions that have prestige in society. Others will have fewer chances. These differences are not a matter of luck. They are determined by the social class to which each person belongs. Today, we usually classify people according to income. Throughout history, other criteria have been used to differentiate between people. In deeply religious societies like ancient Egypt, the priests dominated. In societies continually under threat, it was the warriors. But almost always, those at the top of the hierarchy were those who controlled wealth and exploited others. It is hard to break through the barriers between the social classes. Although social mobility is greater today than ever before, most of the time, people are born into a class and stay there until they die. Social inequalities breed frustration. Strikes, confrontations between bosses and employees, governments and citizens arise from the desire to improve the majority's living conditions. Human beings have often dreamed of an egalitarian society with no relations of domination or exploitation. No such society exists anywhere in the world. At the dawn of humanity, all people were equal when they faced the mysterious forces of nature. Dependent on nature's bounty, hunter-gatherers did not store food. They shared the fruit of their labors right away.
They did probably have some hierarchy related to certain roles. Which doctor or particularly talented hunter?
Ou encore fonction de chasseurs possédant de grandes habiletés. Ça existe.
There were distinctions between individuals that could ultimately lead to hierarchies within the group, but this did not lead automatically to relationships of domination and exploitation.
The invention of agriculture some 12,000 years ago profoundly altered the relations between individuals. For the first time, it was possible for a person who worked the land to produce more food than he needed. From that point on, the strongest or most influential man of the tribe could take the surplus produced by other people. All he needed to do was to own the land, and he could live on the work of others. This was the beginning of man's exploitation of man and the appearance of social classes. 5,000 years ago, there were already distinct organized social classes in Sumerian society. From birth, people knew to what class they belonged.
Those who owned the means of production, the heads of state, the clergy, the great families of administrators, were the ones who eventually took possession of the so-called surplus, the share the peasants didn't consume. If I'm a member of the aristocracy, what will I do with that surplus? Well, I'll pay craftspeople and government servants and merchants who will journey to foreign lands and bring back the raw materials I need. And they'll make me beautiful necklaces, lovely vases, fine furniture, in other words, luxury goods. Will those goods go to the peasants? Of course not. They will go to those who control the means of production. In Egypt, the peasants produced wealth from agriculture. Did they have the pyramids, the tombs? Of course not. Those belonged to the pharaoh and his relatives and the great families with links to the state.
Egyptian society, like Sumerian society, was very hierarchical. Rulers, priests, soldiers, peasants, and slaves formed closed groups. It was well nigh impossible for a person to move from one group to another. In Greece and Rome, there were more and more slaves, prisoners of war or peasants deep in debt. They worked in the fields and built the roads, the palaces, the city fortifications. Free men or slaves? In the world of the ancients, this question of status was vital.
The principle of wealth is not a universal principle of stratification. For example, you could be a very wealthy slave in ancient Rome. You could even become a minister if you were a slave, but still you were a slave. You can be killed by a patrician, and killing of a slave was not a very big crime, while killing a free man was. So citizen status, whether you are free or a slave, was much more important than wealth.
In Rome, free men were divided into two classes with opposing interests. The patricians, who controlled land and the affairs of state, and the plebeians, doomed to manual labor and often reduced to slavery. This opposition of the two parties led to the first class struggle in history. In 494 BC, the plebeians held a general strike. They won certain forms of protection and access to the magistrature and to the Senate.
As Rome created a more elaborate and larger empire, the opportunities for Romans of all kinds of class positions increased, and many of the lower positions in the empire were filled by people who were outside of Roman ethnic ancestry. And during this period, the kind of class distinction among Romans was reduced. There were new opportunities for advancement in the military service, new opportunities for gaining property, and so more people from plebeian backgrounds were able to move up in the system.
In 500 AD, the Germanic tribes attacked and the Roman Empire fell. A pervasive climate of insecurity prevailed in Europe for several centuries. To protect themselves against poverty and oppression, the weakest members of society sought the protection of powerful warlords. When danger loomed, everyone took refuge in the warlord's fortified castle. In exchange for his protection, the peasants agreed to serve him for the rest of their days. And so the feudal system was born, repeating this type of relationship, built of bondage and obligations, in